What are the cultural terms of these new times? What makes it a different world culturally?
Well, several things. I mean, one is, I think, the interdependence between different cultures. I think we're accustomed to think about the cultures as really still very rooted in their sort of national nation-state bases, and then in their regions, you know, first world, second world, third world. We know that those things are always never quite tightly defined, but I think we do. And I think that's just finished. I think economic and cultural processes just mean the interpenetration of the first world with the third and the second with the first, etc. That's what globalization means culturally. We know what it means economically in terms of the integration of financial markets and so on. But culturally, I think it means that, let me give you an example. It means that when I ask anybody where they're from, I expect nowadays to be told an extremely long story. You know, that they're from really 5 different places, and their aunts are from Odessa, and their brothers are in the Pakistan, etc. You know, everybody seems to come from about 5 different places, and in their heads, their sense of themselves to be juggling a kind of set of world identities, as they were trying to find their place in a number of different possible senses of who they are. So that's just a notion of how everything is, you know, you go to a normal city anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter where it is, and you expect to see cultures cheek by jowl with one another. I think that just creates a notion of mosaic, of fragmentation, of reformulation culturally, which affects our mindsets.
Let me put what you just said together with what you started with, which is the sense we're in a cultural melting pot. We eat Japanese, listen to Ghanaian music, sleep on Finnish beds, go for holidays in funny places. We're intersected at every point by different cultures, and our definition of culture has changed radically. It's no longer just high culture in the arts, it's popular culture as well. I mean, isn't a more critical way to describe that situation to say we don't actually know what we value in culture anymore? Everything's interesting, high culture, low culture, from advertising to pop art to great art. It's all in a kind of mishmash now, and it's very hard to sort out basic questions of value anymore in the culture. What do we value? Is that what's in crisis when we use the word postmodern, for example?
Well, that is certainly one of the things that's in crisis. That is to say that I don't think that anybody who feels modern culture on their pulses can rest with an older scale of values, you know, which sorted out what is good, what is reasonable, what will persist, what is universal, what is, you know, passing and evanescent. Though that sense of cultural hierarchy, which I think was what the arts used to transmit, really. You know, why in English literature and English culture and in the English Academy we had the arts there at all. It was a kind of means of transmitting that sense of a set of hierarchy of values, which were all, of course, socially inscribed as well. They weren't just values free-floating up there. Certain people held those. Nevertheless, they could be transmitted from one generation to another. And I think it's impossible to live now without a sense of cultural relativism. But I think that there's a deeper question lying behind your question to me. I think you're asking me, how can people live without, you know, some sense that there's an ultimate truth or an ultimate scale of values, or, you know, some universal appeal that one can make beyond the flux of experience? And I don't know, but I don't any longer think that this is just a transitional phase and that we're moving on to some other more settled period. I think, you know, culturally we're in the kind of phase of permanent revolution. We are going to have to live in a more relativistic universe. And given where I come from, I have to say I think there's some good things about that, you know, because that old sense of culture. Well, because that old sense of cultural values was, of course, for people like me on the margins, profoundly rooted in power. It had to do with economic and political and cultural and class power, had to do with white power, with European power, and with colonial power. And the undermining of that, although I think it gives a kind of a sense of the collapse of points of reference to people, and therefore it's a very disturbing period to live through, nevertheless holds out the possibility of other scales of values that have been actively marginalized historically for large numbers of people in the world, beginning to achieve their own valorization. Although ultimately how one, you know, balances off the one against the other is a very difficult question. I mean really very difficult. I don't want to talk about the Salman Rushdie affair in detail, but, you know, the Salman Rushdie affair reminds one of the incommensurability of cultural relativism. At a certain point, you can't both believe he should be shot for religious reasons and he should say whatever he wants to say because of freedom of speech. The grinding sort of confrontation between those opposing scales of value doesn't make cultural relativism an easy position. But I don't know if there's any alternative to it.